So thank you very much for the kind introduction, and it's an honor to be able to join all of you this morning. As was explained, they've asked me to speak to you about how things are changing in the world of technology and security, and in essence, what's going to come next to predict the future for you. Now, the problem of that is that we're not very good at predicting the future. And I say we, I mean all of us collectively. And a good example of this is actually from an article that the New York Times published over 100 years ago. So I'm going to do like the president. I'm going to beat up on the failing New York Times, but I'm going to use an illustration from 100 years ago to show that it's not failing. And it was an article printed on October 9th, 1903 that predicted the future. It said, quote, "The flying machine, which might really fly, might be evolved by the combined and continuous efforts of mathematicians and mechanicians in from 1 to 10 million years from now," end quote. The exact date that they published that article, those two brothers there, the Wright brothers, began to assemble the first working flying machine in what had been a bicycle shop and then became the first flying machine factory. Now, we could throw our hands up in the air and say, you know, gosh, the future's unpredictable. We shouldn't even try. There's a couple of problems with that. The first is every single person in this room, like it or not, is a futurist. That is, whatever job you have, including in the space of contract management, you're making assumptions about and decisions about the future. That is, looking at everything from potential costs to thinking about the effect on training, to thinking about strategy, operations management, whatever. You're making decisions and assumptions about the future. You can't avoid being a futurist. The second point is, while we don't have a great track record at identifying specific events with any kind of great confidence, there are certain things that we can do. We can identify the key forces that are out there that are shaping the potential future worlds that lie ahead of us, the change agents that are out there. The best way to illustrate this is to think of a tea kettle on top of a stove, and you've been given the job to predict the behavior of water in that tea kettle. Now, if you had to do it at the molecular level, you'd fail. We can send a robot to Mars, but we can't predict the behavior of water at the molecular level. But if you were looking at that system, you wouldn't be helpless. You would ask yourself very basic questions about what are the change agents, what are the key trends in the system. Specifically, is the heat on? Knowing that if enough heat is applied to that tea kettle, you don't know exactly when or where, but that water molecule is going to turn to steam. Now, that doesn't mean that's the inevitable future. Nothing's inevitable. All sorts of other things can happen. Your little kid could come along and knock the tea kettle over. But the point is, if you're trying to predict the future, you would identify the key trends, the key change agents in the system. As John Naisbitt once said, quote, "Trends, like horses, are easier to ride in the direction that they're headed." So for us, what are the trends that matter? And what I want to hit, and I think it links back to the themes of this conference in terms of understand and adapt, is key forces are going to play out not just over the next couple of weeks and months and even budget, but rather over the course of your career and those that you lead. And in essence, they're ones that hit first technology, but then the ripple effects of that technology in terms of the threats that are emerging from it, and then finally the change in the geopolitical environment and how that reshapes how we need to think about threat. Now, the first one of these areas is technology itself, but it's a very special kind of technology. It goes by a lot of different buzzword names. For the folks that work in the defense enterprise, you'll remember there used to be revolutionary technology. Now the buzzword is disruptive technology. If you're outside the military, weirdly enough, you call it a killer app. What we're talking about here is technology that's not an evolutionary improvement. It's not, iPhone 6 to iPhone 7. It's a leap ahead. It's regular phone to smartphone. It's a technology that gives you a kind of capability that was science fiction a generation ago. But importantly, it's not something that solves all your problems. In fact, what defines this kind of technology, revolutionary, disruptive, killer app, is the fact that it gives you a new set of questions that you aren't ready for. And there are two kinds of questions. The first, what is possible that wasn't possible before? But maybe the tougher one is the second kind of question. Issues of right and wrong, that is, what is proper, that we weren't debating a generation ago. And it might be the right and wrong way to organize your office or agency or business, right and wrong way to recruit or train, or might be a legal or ethical right and wrong question that we weren't thinking about a generation ago and we have to figure out right now. So what are some of these technologies that are out there that reach this level? A couple years back, I was part of a project that the Pentagon sponsored, and we were asked to essentially find this out. And the way we went about it is that we did both deep dive research, but we also interviewed about 60 subject matter experts with very diverse backgrounds. So everything from people who worked at organizations like DARPA, the people who brought us the internet, to people outside government, leaders of university labs. We looked to people in business to guide us, both government contractors to people at organizations like Google and Facebook. We looked to venture capitalists, the people putting their money in making the future come true. And across this very diverse set of people, we asked the same basic question. What technology today do you think is like the computer in 1980? Now, if you remember the computer in 1980, most people in this room still remember it. You know, it was a real technology, but it hadn't yet changed the world. And this is a word cloud of what they answered to us that reached that level in their opinion. And as I go through them, I don't want you to lock in on the individual technologies, but I want you to think about the computer in 1980 to today and all the decisions we either did make relative to them that we regretted along the way, or the decisions that we didn't make, usually is the case that we regretted not making, again, from 1980 to today. And think about, there's a whole host of technologies that are about to have that kind of impact. The other aspect of the computer that's an interesting parallel is the way it changed everything from your personal life, how your family operates, to business models, to the military itself. These are technologies that have that same kind of potential impact in the opinion of the experts out there. So the first one of these technology bucket areas that they categorized into is hardware, specifically robotics. And the way to think about this is that the US military, look back to a little after 9/11, our forces go into Afghanistan. US military at the time has a handful of unmanned aerial systems, or what we all call drones. None of them were armed. On the ground, it went in with 0 ground robotic systems. Today, the US military has over 10,000 drones in the inventory, many of them, of course, armed, another 12,000 on the ground. In the time since, we've moved from, it's not just us as the player in robotics. At New America, we have an open source tracker, and we've documented 86 different militaries out there that are using robotics today. But of course, it's not just a military or security technology. We had another project that tried to see how drones were being used for good around the world. And they went everywhere from Brazil to Congo, and they found them being used in just the A's in agriculture and archaeology. So huge space that's going on in this. Now, the impact of drones is not just in these sort of numbers and roles, but how it's changing the way we think about fundamental things. You're watching right here an act of war, and you just experienced it in the same way that the person that pulled the trigger did. Thousands of miles away, not in any danger. Something's going on big here about this most important realm and how we think about it, how we experience it. Now that's all history though. What comes next with robotics? Well, they're changing in all sorts of different ways. One important one is in their forms. We're moving away from thinking about them as replacements for manned systems. Even the way, you can see here the design, but even the way we talk about them. You know, unmanned system, driverless car. A lot like how we used to call them horseless carriages. Again, describing something by what it's not versus what it is, an automobile, a robot. As we move away from that kind of thinking, it allows us to get inspiration from other designs out there. So one is to think about different sizes when you move away from thinking about design around the human inside. So as you can see here, it's not just about the size of it, it's also the inspiration of the designer, nature. We'll slow-mo on that system there. Now, it's not just, though, their physical form. Maybe more important is their intelligence and their autonomy. You're about to watch here a historic moment where an autonomous robot is able to take off and land from an aircraft carrier. The toughest human pilot task, at least in the opinion of any Navy pilot. It's so tough they can't stop talking about it. Now, the point is not just that you see that it does it perfectly, but it created a new problem by it doing perfectly. The robot landed itself exactly on the same spot on the carrier deck again and again and again and again, such that it began to weaken the carrier deck in a way that had never happened in the 100 years of human pilots. Now, this idea is, again, not just that it's doing it on its own, but also how it can share that knowledge. Not everyone can be a pilot. Not everyone can be a Navy pilot. No Navy pilot can land perfectly every single time. And once an admiral at a speech once yelled back at me, I can. But the reality is none can do it perfect every single time. But they definitely can't share that knowledge of how to do it in an instant, in a file transfer. It takes them over 11 months, and of course, the trainee doesn't pick it up perfectly. So it's not just about the information, it's about how the information is shared. And again, it's not just a story of landing on aircraft carriers, but autonomy in lots of different realms. And it's playing out in two different ways in both war and civilian life. And they mirror nature. One is illustrated by this commercial here. You may have seen it during the NFL playoffs last year. Budweiser shows you a big 18-wheeler driving down the street. Oh, hold it. Guess what? Human driver, not needed anymore. So in nature, you have intelligence, and our roles is in one way packed into centralized. Does the job on its own. So very direct replacement, big physical form robots. That's one vision of it. There is another way that intelligence is handled in nature. It's disaggregated. It's networked. Each little individual ant, not all that smart, but together ants can do very complex tasks. And what this means is that we can also see tasks broken up. So you just saw a 18-wheeler delivering tens of thousands of cans of beer. 7-Eleven has already used a single small drone to deliver a single Slurpee to someone's house. So it's two things that are important about that. One, it's the movie WALL-E coming true. We're literally that lazy. But two, 7-Eleven, through robotics, found an entire new business model that made sense for them to explore. And of course, each of these has government contracting equivalents. I was at a Marine Corps landing exercise where they used a small drone. It flew itself to deliver a single MRE, so a single meal, out to a Marine out in the field. Broke down the logistics task in a totally new way. Now, this story of robotics doing all these different roles leads to huge opportunity, but also huge new questions. So, for example, we have a big debate that arguably determined the 2016 election around issues like manufacturing and immigration and trade, and we blame those darn foreigners for doing it. The reality is when you look at manufacturing jobs, over 80% of them were lost to technology already, and technology doesn't give it back. That story in manufacturing, of course, will hit many other areas. One would be, go back to that truck driver who was watching the NFL playoffs, sipping a bud, probably not excited to see that commercial that showed that they might be replaced. And you can see it's not just them, but on mass scale. It's not just those direct blue-collar jobs. There was an Oxford study, Oxford University, of 702 different jobs, and they found that 47% of them will face replacement or reduction by robotics and AI within our lifetime. A different study by McKinsey found not 47%, it found 45%. A third study from PwC had a good news, it found only 38%. The point is the range is very powerful for when we think about our economy and what will play out, and of course what you will be managing in your roles. Now, this story of hardware doing more things is really playing out because of another technology bucket area, what binds them together. software. And again, to echo back to science fiction, the way that I illustrate this is with this image here. It is from the exact year that the original Star Wars movie came out. This is the internet when Star Wars first came out. This is why Princess Leia doesn't just think to email the Death Star plans. This is a depiction of the internet today, and of course it doesn't do justice to the complexity and spread of the internet. Now, that's, again, the history. What's changing? Well, one is the who and the where of the internet. We're just a couple, arguably a year from an important moment in not just technology, but human history, where just under half the world's population is online. So then we're going to see the other half come online. But as you can see, that half that's already online is clustered in certain locations. The half that will come online will be in other locales. They'll also come online in different ways. It's not going to be the story of big desktop computer, then laptop computer, then mobile device. It's going to be coming on with mobile device. It also means we've got half the world, when we think about security issues, that has never experienced all the cybersecurity threats, nor built up the wonderful architecture of cybersecurity policy that we've done in the United States. Now, that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The point of this is that we've got about half the world to go through those growing pains that we're not yet through. That shift of mobile, of course, is not just about the developing world. It's about how we're changing in our use of the internet itself. About 80% of the internet connections by the year 2025 are going to be mobile in some way. Now, what this means is it's not only how we do work, whether it's communication, to how we deal with finances, everything to this conference itself, doing it on a mobile app. It also means that we have to redefine how we think about security. So you have BYOD. We all want to bring your own device in and out of our personal and professional lives. Again, all the way up to the president himself demands that ability, which is a shift over just the last couple of years. Now, that connects to another key change in the internet itself, the move to what we call the Internet of Things. The origin of the internet was the revolutionary idea that you could use computers to communicate. Two people could talk back and forth using a computer. That's an idea that comes out of actually a defense contracting agency back in 1969. And then importantly, the person who wrote the memo for it was a contract person that could write the check for it. Now, the shift though is now we're using things to have communications without us. So right now there's roughly about 8 to 9 billion devices online. Most of them are things like a phone or a laptop computer. We're moving into a world where the things will number. The estimates are between 50 billion to 126 billion, but there'll be things like smart cars, smart power grids, smart office buildings, you name it. Now, a good illustration of this change, again, is not just in the raw numbers, but the roles that they take and the roles that they take in our world. So this is a smart refrigerator. If you've not seen one before, it's amazing. It has on the front of it a display that shows everything from your Gmail account to a calendar for the family. So, little Timmy has soccer practice at 3 p.m. Dad, you see you need to be there to pick up little Timmy at 3 p.m. Inside, the refrigerator is monitoring things like how much milk is left, and when it gets down to 1/4 left, the refrigerator then orders to Amazon Whole Foods replacement milk, which is delivered either by a person or very soon a robot. Amazing, very cool. Now everyone's going, okay, how do we contract that for our office? But think about what just changed there. Your refrigerator became a communication device, a coordination cell, and a marketplace. Was it you or your refrigerator that just bought the milk? That also redefines the perimeter of security and data itself, because your refrigerator, again, became a core node in your world. Now, that leads to something else very powerful, big data. Now, big data is this catchphrase that we use lots and lots, and I think it's important for us to break down what we mean by big data. To me, it's 4 things. The first is the sheer mass amount of data that's being collected because now our computers have changed to have what we call sensors. Computers used to just communicate back and forth. Now they collect information about the world beyond the computer. So your smartphone, for example, has about 25 sensors on it. Some are pretty obvious, camera, taking photos of the world beyond it. Some are less obvious, geolocation, where are you in the world? So for example, the way your Uber app tracks you, not only when you're in Uber, but whenever you're moving about. That sheer mass of sensors means that we've got, when we crunch the numbers, we're moving to roughly 1 trillion sensors out there collecting data about the world around us. That sheer mass of data is more than we've ever seen before. It leads to a second fundamental shift, which is where do we store that data? You don't keep it inside the refrigerator. You don't keep it inside your smartphone. You move it into the cloud. And the cloud, therefore, allows you to do something else. The third change, bring together different types of data and draw incredible new insights that wouldn't have been possible before. My favorite illustration of this is they did a study of judges and how long they sentenced people to jail, and they found that if the sports team in the judge's hometown lost the night before, they sentenced people to 2% longer on average. Now, you know, in most crowds, people would go, well, 2%, that's kind of marginal. In this crowd, you'd be like, yeah, 2% is a really big deal. But the point is, it doesn't not only seem fair, but also that insight of sports team scores and jail time is not something you would naturally find, but you found it by bringing all together the information. There's a fourth issue that we don't wrestle with enough in big data, is how it gives us new insights, but also new dilemmas of trust that arguably we're not ready for. So I, for example, advise a major bank, and through no active, deliberate collection on their own, they discovered the exact inflection point at which someone would be willing to pay rent in an apartment. So the max you could charge them before they would say, that's too much, I'm walking away from that. The bank didn't deliberately set out to gain that information, but it gained it, which created then a dilemma for the bank. Who does it owe? Does it owe its customer to keep this private, or does it owe its shareholder to maximize this incredible new source of information? And you can think again about all the parallels in the world of government contracting, these kind of dilemmas of trust. Now, what was going on here is, of course, not people taking the data, but machines, artificial intelligence. We've grown numb to the spread of AI around us. AI is why your kids can't spell, autocomplete. It's also moved into more advanced roles in everything from the fields of medicine to contracting. Now, of course, underscoring this shift in AI and software is the idea that software itself has become a new form, or rather platform, of payment. It's become money. And again, huge efficiencies to come out of things like Bitcoin, and then we move into the more interesting things like blockchain. But it also opens up, again, new questions and new opportunities for others. So we've seen it create efficiencies in contracting, including contracting efficiencies for hackers who use it to trade back and forth outside of regular financial streams. Another key shift in terms of buckets of technology. It's a technology that was never imagined in the world of Star Wars. It was never imagined in the original Star Trek. It wasn't until the best Star Trek The Next Generation, that you get the idea of what they call a replicator, what we call a 3D printer, direct digital manufacturing, taking a bit of computer design and turning it into a thing. What are some of the changes that come out of this? Well, it's affecting everything from how we think about intellectual property to overall business processes to overall profit models. So for example, I was out with a company like Saab, and like many major manufacturers, their plan is not merely to make money off of the system, but the decades worth of spare parts from the system. What happens when those spare parts can be made by someone else? I think it's going to do to at least the defense industry what the iPod did to the music industry. Basically utter disruption and hitting everything from supply chain to IP, you name it. Another illustration is that little bus on the bottom right corner there. That is Olio, a 3D printed autonomous electric shuttle bus that's made by Local Motors, an Arizona-based automaker that crowdsources vehicle design. Every clause in that sentence is disruptive to the automobile industry. And you can see it's not science fiction. There it is. Or another illustration in terms of the who is that drone there. That drone was built by a group of British university students who wanted to build a better drone than what the British military has, and they use a lot of comparable US systems. They design it in a CAD program, they manufacture it with a 3D printer, and they fly it. From concept to first flight, 1 week. The issue here is not just the speed, it's also the who, British university students, and again, compare that to, I don't know, how long the F-35 took to flight. Now, the story here also shifts to other areas. Wetware, human performance modification, using technology to change us, or as I like to think about it, Iron Man meets Captain America meets the Russian Olympic athlete program. Now, this is hitting in everything from genomics and biosciences, which is becoming, if you know the field of cybersecurity, we're moving away from just using passwords to our bodies as a form of security. But we may even change our bodies. Should you carry on a cat card, or wouldn't it be easier to have this little digital tattoo? But it's also moving to how we control technology itself. This gentleman's not able to move his arms or legs. It's part of a DARPA project called BrainGate that allowed him via thought to control the movement of a cursor on a computer screen that then allowed him via thought to navigate the web, write email, you name it. It's not just being used as medical treatment. This gentleman here flew a drone with his mind. For the sci-fi or Clint Eastwood fans, it's the movie Firefox come true. And I want you to think about this not just for flying, it's just an illustration of an incredibly complex task that people were able to do with a brain-machine interface instead of using their little monkey fingertips. And we're not just going to see this, of course, in flight or as medical treatment. Now, all of these things should be making you go, oh, this makes me a little bit queasy, a little bit scary, very disruptive. But it's also because the other thing I was brought to talk to you about, the cybersecurity implications of it. So we've already seen hacking of cars, hacking of medical devices, hacking of drones. Internet of Things that I told you about, so exciting, 70% of it has known vulnerabilities because we're not baking security into the things that we use. And this is shifting how we need to think about place. The internet is very complex, very scary, and part of it is it's become not just a realm of communication, but one of conflict itself. And I'm going to argue to you that while it's somewhat scary, it's not all that complex. It's simply what can people do now with information itself. Very powerful things, but very simple things. Now, the first thing that we can do with information is that we can collect it, and via another change in the internet, social media, we can share it. Now, this has changed, arguably, the nature of secrecy itself. So, for example, the bin Laden raid, supposed to be the most secretive military operation of our lifetime, live tweeted by a guy up late at night in Abbottabad. And you can think about the same aspects of what you can learn about contracting and management simply by what's being shared on Instagram, Facebook, you name it. Now, there's a flip side to this ability to share information online, is that it doesn't have to be true. So you can also spread disinformation in a way that we've never seen possible before. So, and this is at the essence of the discourse over fake news and, most importantly, Russian disinformation campaigns that have hit everything from the American to the French to the German election. And they are real. Let's stop calling them fake. Second thing that you can do with information, you can steal it. Most people in this room probably got this letter because someone, China, broke into the Office of Personnel Management and stole classified background information. But they were able, just like James Bond stealing a file, except now they could steal on scale, over 22 million files. And what we're seeing in terms of this theft of information, whether it's of background information to credit card information, is the scale. And it even is changing how we talk about it. We used to describe incidents that hit, the rare incidents that hit over 10 million records as mega breaches. And now, as they've become more commonplace, we had to come up with a new category called super mega breaches to hit things like Equifax and all the like. We're seeing new combinations. So for example, we have seen hackers work with pirates to figure out which ships to hijack, to hold ransom. But we're also seeing a different kind of attack, which is the idea of stealing information, not to make use of it yourself, like stealing a credit card, but to keep the target from making use of it, to hold their information hostage. Ransomware is actually one of the fastest growing areas in cybersecurity. Last year, it went up by 167 times. Not percent, 167 times. And we're only scratching the surface of it because the next area of ransomware is not going to be holding files hostages of universities or government agencies, but holding things hostage. This is from a hacker convention where people showed off how to hold a thermostat hostage. We've also seen holding cars hostage, building systems, you name it. What else can you do with information? Block information. In this world of cybersecurity, it's called a DDoS. Now, this is what Russia did to Ukraine. It basically threw up an electronic blockade that kept its systems, its government systems, its military systems, commercial websites from communicating back and forth. And that simple blocking of the flow of information had a paralyzing effect on Ukraine as a nation. You can think about similar things hitting us. And of course, it's not just in the realm of war. You may remember the story of Mirai several months back, where basically people hijacked the emerging Internet of Things and used web-enabled cameras to ping away at the world's most popular websites to shut down traffic of everything from Amazon to Delta Airlines. Final thing you can do with information. We haven't seen a lot of it, but it's arguably the most scary. Change it. So someone, the United States, wanted to do something about Iranian nuclear research. So we developed a cyber weapon that didn't steal it. We know how to build atomic bombs. Instead, changed the information in their systems. It changed the spin rates, the pressure settings. And solely by changing the software code, it caused physical damage to the target. A couple things are important in this. The first, that makes it the very first cyber weapon in history, using code to damage a target. Second, cyber weapons are unlike every other weapon in that they bring their own blueprint with them. So Stuxnet went after an industrial control system called SCADA that's not just used in Iranian nuclear research, it's used in everything from US Navy engine rooms to power grids to factories, you name it. And so we have this issue of opening up new possibilities and then circle back to the growth of the Internet of Things, all these things that are coming online that the settings on them can now be changed to cause physical damage. What's notable is that we also might see something we haven't seen yet, but I'm going to argue to you that we will soon, which is a type of hack that goes after not merely the software, but the hardware. We're in a strange realm where we buy much of what we use, our supply chain, whether it's business to the military, from potential adversaries. What we're getting at here is called a hardware hack, where you bake in vulnerabilities into the microchip itself such that they can be activated to cause damage later on. And finding it is not just like finding a pin in a haystack. It's like trying to find a pin in a haystack full of pins to figure out which one is the bad microchip. The point of all this is that we have deep fundamental questions that we have to figure out. And they hit everything from who do we hire? How do we recruit them? What kind of powers do we give them? To questions like, when am I at cyber war? Will I even know? Who fights a cyber war? And that leads to the final issue. It changes the who and the why of security. So you heard about kind of the what and the how. So a couple of years back, we woke up to the threat of a new kind of actor. Non-state actors that were transnational. We called them transnational criminal groups and hacktivist groups. I'm going to argue that we're seeing a similar kind of shift going on in the who of security that hits us all. And it's actually a throwback. The 20th century was defined by state threats. 2 world wars that happened, a Cold War that shaped pretty much everything that we did, and everything from war to the space race to how we looked at the Olympics. We thought we were done with this kind of state nature of threat. And instead, we've seen it come back. And this is something I played with in a recent book called Ghost Fleet. But basically, we're seeing 21st century technologies cross with 20th century style politics, whether it's Russia and Ukraine fighting, to the competition between Iran and Saudi Arabia, to the geopolitical race going on between the United States and Russia and China. Now, the danger, the change of this is that when you bring 20th century politics together with 21st century technologies, it gets really messy and confusing. So, for example, it involves people and companies in ways that cross borders like we've never seen before. Cyber conflict, cyber threats are inherently global. They'll touch any home front. So even when you don't want it to, that example I gave you of Stuxnet, we sabotage Iranian nuclear research. The reason that we in this room all know about it and can talk about it is because the software also popped up in 25,000 other computers around the world, everywhere from India to Belarus. Also, of course, these conflicts are ones that involve civilians, companies, in new ways, because the internet itself is inherently civilian. And so what this is doing is changing the who of the threat. We're seeing an evolution, and also the why. So go back to the original threat actor on the internet. This is him. This is a 16-year-old in his parents' basement who's able to breach the CIA and the FBI. You can see the very powerful technology that he has at his knees there. It's one of those old spool printers with the perforated paper on the side. I don't know why he's using it, but he's ready. Now, while some people, Vladimir Putin and those that repeat his lines, say that these kind of threats are just teenagers in their parents' basement, the reality is that now it's far more complex and dangerous. More than 100 nations have created some kind of cyber military command, us, China. To more difficult are state groups that are trying to pose as non-state actors, like, for example, Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear, which, if you're not familiar with them, they're the groups that hit the Joint Staff Email System, American banks, American think tanks and universities, World Anti-Doping Agency, coincidentally right after Russian athletes got caught doping, French election, Danish Defense Ministry, Norwegian Nuclear Institute, Republican National Committee, Democrat National Committee, prominent Republicans like Colin Powell, prominent Democrats like John Podesta. Let's not weave this as just one aspect. It's a big, threatening trend, and we've got to own up to it. Now, the shift in terms of the who is also hitting the why. This message here is the nightmare that any agency lead or CEO fears. Now, if you're not familiar with it, maybe this will help you. This is the message that the CEO of Sony got when he was preparing to release this movie. Basically, Sony did something that another nation didn't like and paid the price for it. So that's one reason why you might get hit. Another might be that you have something that someone else wants. It's very obvious. So intellectual property theft that we've seen hit everything from American defense contractors. That's the F-35 on the top. On the bottom, wow, the F-35, it's painted blue. Why'd they put red stars on it? That's because it's the J-31. China's version that is already flying. Now, it either looks exactly like the F-35 out of sheer coincidence, or it's because, as we document in the Ghost Fleet book, the design process was breached on at least 3 separate occasions. IP theft is not just hitting defense contractors, it hits everything from mining companies, furniture companies, to large soft drink manufacturers. It might be because you have something that's not specific, but that everyone has and everyone wants. So we are seeing a North Korean government link group called Lazarus that's hitting banks around the world. It recently conducted a $81 million bank heist. Why is North Korea doing this? North Korea needs money, and yet it's hitting private sector targets. It might be because you have something that's not of clear value to you, but it is to the attacker. So one of the largest breaches in history was the Anthem breach. 78 million Americans lost some kind of data, everything from their email addresses, Social Security, medical ID, income, you name it. Now, the actor that hid it, allegedly, was China. Now, why would China hit this kind of information? Go back to the story of other hits, OPM and big data, and now I've got really interesting data to bring together, including because in that 78 million was a subset of government contractors, government employees, and family members, and now I'm getting really interesting data going on. Another example of this was United Airlines was allegedly hit a couple years ago by a state actor, allegedly China. And again, why would they want to hit United Airlines? What kind of financial information? Most of you live in Washington, D.C. You realize how international flights out of D.C. are mostly controlled by United. Now I've got interesting information that I can marry up in tracking the movements of U.S. government employees or people who don't want to appear to be U.S. government employees. Lots of good stuff when you go after this. The final thing that might happen is you might be hit because you're just a convenient target or you're a symbolic target. So go back to the story of Stuxnet. We sabotage Iranian nuclear research. Iran feels the need to hit back to show it can play this game too. It doesn't hit back against the US government, hits back against Saudi Aramco, a private business. Over 30,000 computers there are turned into bricks effectively, they're just wiped clean. And Saudi Aramco is like, what did we do? You were just in the way. Now, these trends, they're amazing. They're overwhelming. And notice I didn't come up here with a PowerPoint that had 3 bullet points and these are the 3 things that you ought to do. Instead, what I did is present you with a series of trends and deep questions that we're all going to have to figure out. And many of them we don't yet have the answer to. And that's okay. As Werner Herzog once put it, sometimes a deep question is better than a straight answer. But throughout all of this, I hope there's one takeaway message that you have. And it's a message that links back to the theme of the conference in terms of the need to understand and to adapt. With all this change that's going on, you simply can't stand still. Nations, companies, individuals that aren't changing will fall behind. And so being innovative, seeking to understand, seeking to adapt, they will be the key to success or failure in the years ahead. Thank you. Oh gosh, how long do we have at that? There's layer upon layers of things that are needed in the cybersecurity space, and what's interesting is the back and forth between the private and the public sector in it. One is the raised need for awareness, not merely of the bumper sticker version of the threat. Pearl Harbor is coming. Instead, focusing on the actual real types of attacks that have already happened and what are the basics that we need to put into place to prevent those. So that's everything from, whether it's the story of OPM or Equifax, it's basically agencies and companies that were not prioritizing security high enough, were not taking sort of the very clear needed measures, and up to the point of the incident had not good incentives for them to do it. People weren't being held accountable. Now we're seeing an ex post, after the fact, people being held accountable, and that's a good thing. And but it came too late. So we're going to have to. What I'm getting at is bake into the process more prioritization of cybersecurity at the front end, and then also how we're going to figure out accountability for it on the back end. Where this is becoming, I think, I'm particularly worried about is the Internet of Things version of this, where whether it's the toys that you're planning to buy for your kids at Christmas, to the things that you're planning to buy or sell to agencies. Many of them, they'll be web-enabled, they'll feed up into the cloud, that's part of the efficiencies that they bring, but there's very little requirement for cybersecurity built into them. Even little basics like it shouldn't have a default password, things like that. And essentially what we're doing is we're repeating almost all the errors that we made with the original internet and applying it to the Internet of Things. Oh, that's me.
Remember, you can submit your questions. Peter, while we're waiting, some questions are coming in right now.
I'm going to ask whoever put the timer up here.
What worries you? This is going to be a good question. What is it that keeps you up at night?
Can you pass that back to them back there? Thank you. Technology problem. The timer is telling us either that we're out of time or I'm going to explode.
So what is it that really keeps you up at night? That among all the threats that you shared about that you're most concerned with?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna give you two. The first is we tend to fear most what we don't understand. And I think that's, again, hitting back to the theme of this space, of the conference. Understanding is often it's not just about how to find a fix of something, it's how do I weigh it, how do I measure it? And in general, we fear most what we don't understand. For me, the bio side is obviously hugely significant. And I didn't even talk about things that are going on in biosciences and genomics, you name it. And it scares me because it's so significant. It so hits to the heart of what humans, who we are, what we can do, really deep legal, ethical questions. But it's also because I don't have a good background or grounding in it. And so it's what I find fearful. The second, more pertinent, is the issue that I hit of disinformation. And this is I'm wrapping up a nonfiction book project that's looking at social media and what it's done to politics, business, war, crime, pop culture. And one of the things that's playing out is our inability to collectively agree to just basic facts. And if you disbelieve everything, you'll fall for anything. And we see that happening now in our political system, but what's important is it was used to target us from an outside actor, but it's also presented to the world a model that's cheap and effective, and we're seeing copycats of this and everything from how do I affect an election not at a national level, but at a state level. We've seen this, and the actors are not just foreign governments, but now we've seen, for example, drug cartels trying to get in on the business. Hold it. I can manipulate an election and it doesn't cost a couple $1 million it might be partisan actors. So we see that kind of manipulation on the election side, but we're also starting to see potentially companies targeted in the same way where they are either attacked or blackmailed with the same kind of I'll conduct a cheap and effective disinformation campaign against you and effectively destroy your brand regardless of the facts. And that just, we're talking about here an attack literally on, not to get kind of wonky, but the Enlightenment itself. The whole change of the Enlightenment in the 16 and 1700s was the idea that science could prove actual facts and we would all agree to them. That's the foundation of our own approach to democracy, and yet we're starting to question that. And again, you can see it in everything from, well, I don't like this news, so therefore it's fake, to, yeah, there's been 20 different studies that showed X, but I don't agree with them, and so therefore I'll discount them. And that I don't know how we will be able to function effectively if we truly can't agree to facts anymore.
Thank
So it actually links back rather well to what I just, of a deep fear. We have a situation where, count me on the net neutrality side. I'm worried about the changes that are being pushed forward. And what's fascinating is we've seen first a discounting of facts. So you see all the technologists and engineers want this. Actually, no study shows that all the technologists and engineers and entrepreneurs want it. In fact, the changes that are being put in place are not just an attack on the way that the internet has worked, but it also potentially means that we won't see a next generation of new companies popping up, the next Facebook or whatever. So, we're claiming that a community wants it, no study shows it. And then second, and this we can definitively document, we saw a disinformation campaign of fake accounts, bots, trying to pose as people urging this on the comment site. It's actually, you can go right now, it's the source of an investigation by the New York State government, where you can go online and see if your name was falsely used on the, and it was, I'm not talking about hundreds or thousands, millions of fake comments put up to support the changes. You can see if your name was in the set, and you'd be like, I didn't make that comment, yet you may be in there. There's a website you can go after it. But also we have the interesting challenge, who the heck paid for this disinformation campaign? So I'm both not a supporter of the outcome, but I'm deeply disturbed by the process by which we're making this decision. I think it's flawed, or a different way of putting it is the process itself has been hacked.
There's another question from the floor. Can you talk to the impact of blockchain technology as it relates to business and our field of contract?
Blockchain's obviously, again, one of these areas that's hugely important, potentially disruptive, because it opens up both great new efficiency possibilities to obviously different ways of approaching security that might be more valid. The application of it hits so many different fields, whether it's how do I, is your example, how do I go after contract management or ensure a line of activity remains secured, to we're seeing it being used in the developing world, where property lines are hard to document and hard to keep straight for long periods of time over multiple generations, because so much has been done through handshake deals. And so we're seeing it as a way of, and these, when there's a dispute, it actually can be, creates outcomes of violence. And so we've got a project at New America that's looking at how blockchain might be used for property rights, not just in the United States, but in favelas in Brazil, to tribal lands in Kenya. What I'm getting at is it bodes to be one of these huge technologies that's applied wide and has huge impact. There's a caveat to it. We need to be aware of kind of the classic Silicon Valley over-enthusiasm, where now you'll read op-eds that'll say things like, blockchain will solve world poverty, blockchain will solve world hunger, or blockchain will solve contract management problems. No, it's just not, because we've already seen people try and figure out how to manipulate it or go after the other ends of it. It's similar, not blockchain in general, but there's certain kinds of e-currency that we've already seen. They were promised to be unhackable. We've already seen them hacked. So again, it's hugely important, very big deal, but caveat, don't think of it as some kind of silver bullet solution to all your problems.
And this is the last question I think we'll have time for. Is the United States taking the correct measures to protect the country against cyber attacks?
We are in a much better place than we were a decade ago. We've seen a huge series of, you can think of it as new organizations created, whether it's on the military side, Cyber Command, to every single agency now has cybersecurity teams. Almost every agency has a greater empowered leadership. So we've gone after it organizationally. We've clearly gone after it budget-wise. We're spending way more. And we see also a greater amount of activity. So by all those measures, we're doing more. And again, that's at the federal level, state, local, same thing at private sector. We're, however, not secure because we still fail at many of the basics. We've looked for silver bullet solutions. We've looked for deterrence as a solution. Somehow I'm going to scare the bad guys away from attacking me. That's not been the case. As I mentioned, we haven't had enough accountability for people who fail in meeting the basics, whether it's on the government sector side or on the private sector side. A good illustration, Sony. You know, I showed you the image of the breach. What happened to Sony's share price afterwards? It actually went up. So it's not until we've started to see lawsuits and people losing their jobs that you see boards reacting. So we need more accountability built into it, more resilient strategy, and we also have to have an understanding of the shift in the types of attacks that are coming after us. As I mentioned, we've seen attacks designed to steal information. We're getting better at that. As a nation, we are not in admission and understanding of attacks that are trying to hack not merely the network, but our minds, our beliefs. And again, this is not just a government issue. This is what Facebook fell into. Facebook has one of the top cybersecurity teams in the world, and they focused on protecting their network, and they kept the bad guys out of their network, classic cybersecurity, but they missed fundamentally an attacker hacking the conversation, hacking the brand, hacking their customers' beliefs, and they did not handle it in the 2016 American election. They did in the French election. And what I'm getting at here is that in thinking about cybersecurity, there's both hitting the basics, but also understanding the very different types of attacks that are coming in, and that we have to keep pace with the attacker. We have to evolve just as rapidly as they are. Thank you. Appreciate it.